to the Center for the Performing Arts. I'm Joya, and I'm the Director of Education and Community Engagement. Tonight, you've joined us for our Car Front Seat program with Todd Williams, the great jazz musician. Now, before we get started with tonight's program, I'd like to tell you a little bit about the center. We are located just north of Indianapolis in Carmel, Indiana, and we have a beautiful campus. 3 theaters on that campus. We have the Palladium, which is our 1,600 seat concert hall. We have the Tarkington, which is our 500 seat proscenium arch theater. And then we have the Studio Theater, which is a 200 seat black box theater. All 3 theaters are beautiful. And in addition to those, we have 6 resident companies, and we present artists national and international from all over the world. We really hope you get up to visit us sometime. So that's a little bit about the center. I want to tell you now more about tonight's program. Again, this is called Car Front Seat, and it's sponsored by Car Global. Now, in a pre-COVID world, the way this worked is a couple months before we were to present an artist, we would email the tour manager and ask permission for a small group of students to sit in on the sound check. And then they got to Q&A with the musicians, and then we'd provide dinner and tickets to that performance. But then the pandemic hit, and of course we had to cancel all those live performances. But we did not want to cancel Car Front Seat. So we've taken it virtual, and that's allowed us to bring in presenters and performing arts professionals really from all over the world. Last month we did one from a choreographer in London. So the way this is going to work tonight, we have folks joining us on Zoom and on Facebook. Now the students are going to ask the questions first, but we want you all to ask questions as well. If you're joining us on Zoom, you'll see if you put your cursor down over the bottom, there's a little Q&A function. Feel free to type in questions anytime in that, and once we get finished with the students, we'll come to those questions. If you're joining us on Facebook, just put a question in the comments and we'll come around to those as well. So we are excited to get started tonight, and I want to introduce you to Todd Williams. Now let me tell you a little bit about Todd. He is a sought-after saxophonist, clarinetist, flautist, and clinician. He's known for his work with Wynton Marsalis Quintet and Septet, as well as the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra. Todd is the assistant professor of music education at Indiana Wesleyan University, where he directs the Jazz Ensemble and the Jazz Combo. He is also pursuing his doctorate in music education at IU Jacobs School of Music. A former music director of Times Square Church in New York, Todd has penned a variety of contemporary gospel choral works, including the international favorite, We Proclaim Him. He has toured all over the world and played venues such as the White House, Carnegie Hall, and Hollywood Bowl. And he's appeared with such artists as Harry Connick Jr., Jon Hendricks, Terrell Stafford, Marcus Roberts, Slide Hampton, and Christian McBride. Todd is a 4-time recipient of ASCAP's Plus Award for Composers. And his latest jazz recording, Lift Up Your Heads, can be found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Todd, why don't you join us tonight? We are so excited to have you.
Well, here I am.
Great, how are you?
Doing great, Julia.
Good to see you again. You know, later we're going to talk a little bit about your other project with us, Jazz Talk. But tonight, it's you and the students. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your background, and then we'll get into asking questions with the students. How's that sound?
That sounds great.
All right.
So first, I just want to say thank you to Julia and all the people at the Center Presents and at the Palladium for having me tonight. It's truly a joy. And I love working with these folks. They are truly professionals, and I have nothing but good to say about this organization. So once that season gets started again, buy lots of tickets. Well, in any case, about me, one of the things I want to communicate to the students is that I do have a lengthy resume. However, my start in music was very similar to theirs. I started music before my elementary school years. I started originally with piano, and that was just sort of a short time. Started piano lessons. Once I got into grade 5, started on alto sax, and just quickly excelled at that. And I had an older brother who was constantly an inspiration for me. I always looked up to him and the activities that he was involved with. And once he got to the high school level, I remember hearing the jazz ensemble play, and to hear live music and to hear live trombones and live jazz voicings. That was really monumental for me. It really changed the way I heard music because, for once, the sound that was supposedly on the recordings was live, and it was a lot more vibrant and a lot more alive than what I had known it to be. And so I began to study like crazy as a middle schooler, then a high schooler, and during my middle school years, I started playing doubles. I had a teacher who was he was a professional saxophonist, and he also doubled on flute and clarinet. So he got me started on flute and clarinet, and just all the way through, I've had excellent teachers. Even before that, I had a private teacher who was one of St. Louis's finest teachers, public school teachers, Paul Overby. He wasn't a saxophone player. Incidentally, he was actually a trumpeter. But he was a very good educator. That was my first private teacher. And then Mike Burke was my second private teacher, who was a woodwind specialist. And I mean, he was fantastic with doubling, flute, and clarinet. And then he had a very wide palette in terms of what he was able to express on his instruments. He could play jazz, he could play classical. When he played flute, he sounded like a classical flute player. I mean, he was fantastic. So, but in any case, I pursued music after high school. I went to the Eastman School of Music and very quickly got into touring on the road. I met Wynton actually um, after actually, I met him when I was still in high school. Went to one of his concerts, went backstage, and it's kind of a long story how I got back there, but it's just that I knew somebody who knew somebody, and they invited me back. And so I got to know Wynton, and Wynton kept in touch with me, and thus began a whole long experience of learning solo transcriptions and keeping in touch with Wynton, and then ultimately making it into his band, and that just really opened the door to many other experiences. And as you heard Julia mention those ideas about who, people that I've performed with, it's an amazing thing. There are a lot of names out there, but it's actually a smaller world than one would think. And so I'm just privileged to kind of be one of the musicians, one of the many musicians on the scene, and thankful that I've been so fortunate to be able to meet some of the jazz originators. I remember I had a chance to meet Dizzy. That was a trip, being able to meet, the guy who invented bebop. Um, so all these experiences, they sort of shape how you view artistic expression and how you view jazz. And of course, I've just done nothing but benefit from these other people, and thankful to be here. And maybe Julia, we could start with our first question. I don't know who wants to start first, but
We can. All right, first up, we're going to go to Sam. And Sam is a high school student. And I think he's got a real good question for you. Sam, why don't you take it away?
All right. Can you hear me? I know we had some mic
yeah,
issues.
we're good. I hear you, Sam.
Okay,
Go
sweet.
for it.
Awesome. So my question is, do you have any tips on playing play styles that are very much different to your own? For example, I kind of struggle playing in the style of Basie and Ellington because I really like more modern people like your Robert Glasper, your Corey Henry, that kind of stuff. And I just kind of struggle playing Ellington. So I was wondering if you had any.
Yeah, I got tips. All right, so, well, first of all, I'm glad that you're open to listening to different styles, and I really can appreciate all those things that Glasper and Henry, the things that they're doing. These guys are fantastic musicians, um, and I appreciate their works, and hope to someday play with them. Who knows? Maybe I'll get an opportunity to play with these guys, you know. In terms of playing some of the more traditional styles, well, that is not uncommon. Just to let you in on a secret, the very first time that I heard a Charlie Parker recording, I bought it at a resale LP shop called Vintage Vinyl. It's a place in St. Louis. And I took it home. I was so excited about it. I was like, oh, finally, I'm going to get to discover Charlie Parker, you know. So I get the record at home, I put it on, and I hear, and you know, he's playing, you know, one of the popular tunes. It may have been Out of Nowhere, it may have been All the Things You Are. I don't remember which tune it was, but it was the sound fidelity was very poor. And quite frankly, I just didn't like it, you know. And it was kind of a funny thing because, you know, I was like, wow, this is the guy. Oh, and now it's my job to like this, you know. And I didn't really appreciate it at first. And thankfully, what happened was I ended up taking the record back to the store, and the guy could see that, okay, now this kid, he's just, you know, he's young, he doesn't really understand what's going on, you know. And it just so happens that I heard a recording that the sound fidelity was very poor, and he could see that for that reason, that may have been a distractor. And so instead, he sold me an LP by Dexter Gordon called American Classic. And he's playing the tune Skylark and Cheesecake, and he's playing like some of his really great tunes. And so I listened to that and I liked it much better, you know. And that was recorded in like the 80s, you know. So it had like pretty decent sound fidelity, you know, it's like really good record. But it wasn't until later that I actually began to appreciate the music of Charlie Parker. But one thing that you can do is to maybe just ask around to, like, say, for instance, if you want to check out Basie or if you want to check out Duke's music, you know, maybe ask around and say, hey, you know, which Duke recording should I, if, you know, I'm gonna begin to listen to Basie, you know, um, like a lot of people, they would say, you should listen to the tune Little Darling, you know, like they might suggest a tune like that, you know, or Vine Street Rumble or one of those tunes that is, you're writing this down, right? So you want to check out music that's accessible to you, you know, because every artist has material that is more or less accessible. And there are different periods when people experiment. You know, there are times when people are really trying to go for something that they hear in their mind that hasn't been done before, you know? And so, like today, I was in my car, I was listening to John Coltrane's Meditations recording. And so that's, you know, pretty avant-garde kind of stuff, you know? And I was thinking, wow, you know, what would have happened if this would have been my only exposure to John Coltrane? You know, I probably would have never listened to him, you know? But now my ears are really kind of open to that style because I've listened to all the stuff that preceded that, you know. So I would suggest to you, maybe get a couple of recordings. Like for instance, for Duke Ellington, try listening to the Blanton Webster Band recording. Anything from those recordings. It's a 1942 multi-box set. You know, if you bought it on CDs, it would probably be like 4 CDs or something, you know. But you know, it's online, and just check out the band. I mean, the arrangements are just stellar. And even though it's 1942, it's swinging jazz. Like you would love it, you know. And it's traditional. It's very traditional. You can hear the stylistic differences, but once you hear something like that, you realize, wow, okay, this is really sophisticated for 1942. Just as sophisticated as some of the more contemporary music that I like. So, yeah. Hopefully I answered your question. Do you have any other questions?
I do,
Or is
but
it-
I think we cycle.
Oh, okay. All right. So we're going to cycle to the next question. No problem. No problem.
That's a great question, Sam. I loved that question. And I got to sing the praises. Sam goes to Noblesville High School, and I can't say enough good things about their jazz director there, Bethany Robinson.
Oh,
She
yeah.
has really made that program an outstanding experience for the students. They're all great, great guys and
Yeah, I
girls.
know Bethany.
Yeah,
Fantastic program. Yeah. Well, good for you. You're in good hands, man.
great. All right. So next up, thanks, Sam. And we may come back. I know you've got more questions. We may come back to you. So next up, we have Nicholas. And I know Nicholas is a college student. He is in IU Jacobs School of Music. So Nicholas, why don't you ask your question of Todd?
Sure, thank you. My question was about kind of as young musicians, artists in this music coming up and developing the next wave. What can we do to kind of increase the relevance and also the accessibility of jazz and those in the genres that maybe aren't so mainstream to the average listener?
Oh, yeah. Well, one thing that I've noticed is that, especially when playing music for, like, say, for instance, you're trying to reach a group of people who aren't necessarily jazz fans. One of the things that I've noticed, if you get into studying your audience, first of all, I would suggest that you study your audience. And when I say study your audience, what I mean is like be flexible enough to, for instance, you walk into a situation and if it's all young people, you can kind of add like a little R&B flair to the sound and kind of juice up the arrangements on the spot.
Sure.
Whereas if you could walk into a situation, it's like, wow, everybody's in their 50s and 60s, then they're going to want to hear like Gershwin, and they're going to want to hear like tunes, formerly sung by Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald, and like tunes that have like an intro. You know what I mean? Tunes that are songs, lyrics. They want to hear love songs, and those they can have their level of complexity and artistic flair as well. And so what I have found is that I always try my best to play in a way that really shows respect for the audience, and respect for excellence. And so when the music is really, really relating the message of the music, like sometimes as jazz musicians, we can learn techniques that are way out there, like we start getting into our pedal tones and, playing in fourths and all that kind of stuff. And once we start doing that, we lose them because, they don't know what all that stuff is. And so what you can do is really try to uh, master the playing of form, playing with enough blues sensibility, with even in the context of tunes that are not blues tunes, but actually playing, with blues feeling, making sure, like the rhythm section. Like sometimes I'll notice that with younger musicians, we kind of get off into wandering around into like something that we just learned how to do. Like a lot of times, if it's a drummer, well, he wants to play in seven, so he's gonna play seven on top of that four for like eight choruses. And so even though some of those ideas can be incorporated, it can't it can't overarch what the main goal of the tune is. And so as you play the tune, if you're not going to sing it, maybe say some of the lyrics, maybe speak some of the lyrics to the audience ahead of time so that they know, okay, oh, I get it. This tune is kind of witty. This is a love song. This is a foggy day in London town. And so sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down, like these ideas that are conveyed in the music. The other thing is talk to your audience, be sociable with them, be likable. The more that you talk to the audience and give them the idea that you just love being there with them, then they feel that. And so I would always say this idea of excellence, respecting the audience, and then they will in turn respect you. If the music is not really swinging, they're not really going to get it.
Yeah.
And when I say swinging, I mean specifically like rhythm being really tight. And if it's not a swing tune, then let Latin really be a Latin tune. And if it's a Latin tune, decide on a specific groove to play. If you're gonna play bossa nova, definitely play bossa nova. Don't play bossa nova kind of samba, bossa nova tango. You know what I mean? Like pick a groove and really stick to it because that will help them follow the form. You know, that will help them to understand the context of the music.
Sure.
So,
And maybe
so
even in a broader sense, sorry to as an add-on to that, and maybe it's a little heavy for this talk, but where do you see the future of jazz progressing towards? How do you think it'll play out from here?
yeah. Well, um, I don't know if I can predict that necessarily. I think that what we have are, all right, we've had music from, you know, early simple forms of blues, early simple forms of spirituals, all the way to atonality, 12 tone row, as and all incorporated into jazz. And so in my mind, I'm seeing basically all of contemporary music being fair game. So like the way I hear it, all of that music that's influenced by the early American roots of, you know, rhythm, 12/8 rhythm, you know, African drumming, blues, all of that. I see that as being one big style. Like, so, and just so you know, in my mind, I really don't see jazz different than bluegrass. You know what I mean? Like, I see that as one of the folk oriented genres of music that, you know, I wouldn't pretend to tell you that I'm skilled at bluegrass because I think there are some particular skills that are really pertinent to that style. But the way I hear it in my mind, I hear it the same way, you know, and I would probably learn or try to learn it the same way. So I think anything that's distinctly American, I think all of that is going to be fair game for jazz from this point forward, you know. So that includes, like I said, all the folk styles, all the blues styles, all of the top, all of the popular styles, you know, reggae. Like to me, I hear music with all of that in there, you know. And you know, I know there was a tune that I used to play with Winton called "The Majesty of the Blues," where it was a 6/4 blues tune, but everybody's solo would be like in a different style. Like one person would play like the groove, another person would play swing. Some people would play their solos in major. We would actually change the tonality spontaneously and play a major blues. You know, some people would do like you know, a swing groove or whatever. But the idea, I see all of that as jazz. You know, so that's my take on it. Others may have a different take on it, but hopefully I answered your question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. Julia, where are we going with our next um, question? Because I'll just keep talking.
Oh, well, we next up we have Christopher, and Christopher is a high school student at Pendleton Heights. And Christopher, are you ready to ask your question?
Yeah, I am. So, as a high school junior, I get stuck thinking about college and where I'm gonna go with that, and I'm just one of my questions for you is kind of like what kind of like musical programs did you go through after high school to get where you're at now?
Well, I think that's a fantastic question. But I would put it in reverse a little bit, put the question in reverse a little bit, because I would actually, if I were you, I would start thinking about the opportunities that you have right now in high school. And the reason I say that is because that is typically how people's career, how they unfold. So like, for instance, like right now, I think you told me you were involved in your jazz ensemble.
Yeah, I'm in Jazz Ensemble and Jazz Express.
Okay, so Jazz Ensemble and Jazz Express. And so obviously you guys have your repertoire, and my guess is that you probably are a pretty heavy duty practicer and you really are into it and you enjoy it. Um, well, when I was your age, and I'm sure you do this as well, anything, basically anything band, I was there. You know what I mean? So I was just like, it was, jazz band. It was, we didn't have a combo, but we had a marching band. So I was in marching band. In fact, I was the field commander for marching band. I was out there. I was doing all of that and basically anything music. I was in the musical, I remember we did Grease and we did West Side Story and, we did a lot of, spring musicals. I was involved with that. And Guys and Dolls, we did that. So basically what I'm saying is, be a lover of music of all types and be as excellent as you can be with anything. And just if there's any musical opportunity, the answer is yes. Because at this stage, you're discovering, you don't necessarily want to limit yourself to jazz. You want to be as good of a musician as you can be. And then as you move on from high school, hopefully you will have opportunities that open up quite naturally where if you are doing all things musical well, most likely you're going to get offered some gigs, which I did in high school. I got several offers to do. I remember playing some Broadway style shows with my high school band director, like him and my private teacher. They would invite me to play gigs with them, and so that was like a huge opportunity and a huge opportunity to play doubles and to see what it was like to kind of be under pressure and have to like hit that downbeat at a certain time. Um, so first of all, make much ado with where you are now because that's going to open up the doors. For me, it was really putting forth my all in high school, and then I won a bunch of awards in high school competitions. And then after that, I ended up getting scholarships to go to jazz summer camps. And then after that, met all the people who work with David Baker and like that whole thing. It was like a trickle down effect. And eventually, I was known in the high school and in the local community um, to such an extent that at one point, um, the local PBS station did a special on our high school band, and we toured to Europe, and I ended up being on TV, and it just kind of snowballed. So, but that's how it happens. It happens one thing after the other. Everything you do is related to the next step. So, like, if you do a really great job as a section leader, before you know it, you might get an honorable mention, in a festival or something, or you may get an award, or you may be able to get some gigs, playing for local parties for your parents, or I had a lot of opportunities with my friends playing for parties and wedding receptions and stuff like that. So, and then you have the initiative too. You can take initiative to say, hey, I'm going to put something together. I'm going to put together my own concert. I remember at one point, me and my friends, we did that. We rented a hall. We put together a concert. We charged admission. We played some tunes, and then we took the proceeds and made a recording. So you can do that, and it doesn't take a lot, especially now with the technology. You can pretty much record yourself. So hopefully I answer your question, and thank you very much for asking that, Christopher.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great question, Christopher. Really good program over there at Pendleton Heights. Hey, I just want to remind, we've got a couple more students to ask questions, but I want to remind people, we already have a question that's come in on the Q&A function on Zoom. So feel free to start typing in questions and we'll get to those. But also, if you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll get to those. All right, next up, we have a saxophone player coming to us from, yes, IU Jacobs School of Music. Anna, what is your question for Todd?
Hello.
Hey, Anna.
So my question was about woodwind doubling, which you
Okay.
kind of answered a little bit already, but so I'm a woodwind doubler on saxophone and clarinet, and I'm trying to get the flute chops up as well. So I'm wondering, how you personally prioritize practicing all these different instruments, and then also how you make yourself kind of more marketable as a doubler for some of these opportunities that you have?
Okay. Well, okay. When you listen to music, like for instance, you said you wanted to get more into um, playing the flute. Like right where you are, you probably have an opportunity to hear some pretty advanced flautists. Are you still a student, or did you tell me you just finished?
I'm still a student, and I am taking flute lessons currently.
Oh yeah, so yeah, so sometimes it doesn't have to be in the context of being in the wind ensemble or the orchestra or whatever, but just as you go down the hallway and you hear some uh, flautists practicing, just check them out. Just see like what kind of sound do they have? Like and you know obviously it does require time when you do what they call whistle tones on the head joint, and you've probably done all that kind of stuff, right?
Yep,
And
doing a lot of different things.
yeah, and so yeah, and those things it is true that you have to do all those things, and that is really helpful. um but I would say more than anything, sound is a concept that's here. And so when you hear people play, the thing that sort of helps you to acquire that sound is to really think in terms of like, how can I be true to the style? You know, um, so I'll give you a for instance. If I ask you the question, what is the purpose of vibrato? What would you say?
On the flute,
On any instrument, vibrato on any instrument.
to add color to the sound and uh, for emotional context sometimes also.
Okay. All right. So, all right, that's good. So, I would applaud your answer in part. And the reason is it does add an emotional context to a line. And but as musicians, when we're performing, we don't think about it that way. Okay. And so what you answered, it wasn't wrong necessarily, but I just want to, so as a musician, we have to think like, how a musician thinks.
Yeah.
So for you, when you add vibrato, what it actually does, it adds motion to something that's not moving. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So just think about all the etudes that you have played, or maybe you're working on some etudes right now. Most likely during the notes that are the eighth note movement, unless it's all eighth notes, like if you're playing some Bach or something like that, you might add a little vibrato as the notes move. But for the most part, your vibrato is going to be at the strongest point when there is no motion in terms of eighth notes, quarter notes. If you're on a hold, in other words, you're going to add vibrato. And not only are you going to add it on a hold, your vibrato is going to increase in uh, in the speed of the vibrato towards the end of the note. Yeah, like it's going to do like that, right? And so what that tells the listener, it gives directionality to the line. So like when the listener is hearing you play, they can't technically address what you're doing, but you're holding that note and it's still, and then it starts to waver a little bit and it gets faster and faster and faster. And then before you know it, you've changed notes, right? That tells the listener when you're going to change, right? Even if there's a tempo, unless you actually use that vibrato accurately, it sort of gives um almost like it's like a cultural cue. So like there are cultural cues with language, right? Like when I talk to you, I go, if I say, "Oh no, what's up, yo?" that, oh, okay, he's like a fun guy.
Yeah.
But in music, there's the same thing. So like if you play a line and then you have vibrato before a note, the note is about to change. You know that there's going to be an inclination for the line to change. And so it's like that level of detail you have to get to on your doubles. And so like, for instance, on clarinet, the question to ask is, okay, what is the function of what I'm doing? So on clarinet, you have to ask yourself, am I playing a Woody Shaw big band chart where it's kind of like a swing style clarinet, where it's, it's not as much arpeggios, but it's not at all bebop. You know what I'm saying? Or am I gonna play like a Jelly Roll Morton kind of piece where it's all arpeggios mixed with blues, and then there's like a specific rhythm with the New Orleans tradition. Boop ba doo da boop ba doo da dee ba doo da boop ba doo doo dee boo doo ga boop and doo doo dee. And so like that whole tradition of like, okay, addressing specifically what am I going to play and why am I playing it? The role in the early New Orleans tradition is more like the obligato, you know.
Mhm.
And so like this idea of the obligato of this line that kind of flourishes and goes up and down and all over the place outside of the trumpet line. Like I'm responding to the trumpet, you know, or, you know, or if it's like, more of like a jazz flute style where I'm actually gonna do some bending of the notes, where I'm actually rolling the instrument, like all those things are very particular to those instruments. And so what I think to answer your question, I don't think it's so much an idea of how many hours you're practicing, but what it is that you're practicing so that you can address what you have to play. So, like most of the time, when people call me and say, "Oh, I got something on clarinet I want you to play," I almost automatically know, okay, they want me to play like either like a feature, uh, or either like a early New Orleans kind of thing. I remember Christian McBride. He kept pulling out this chart called Blues for Benny, and so I was like, okay, this is like a clarinet feature. I know what the is,
Yeah.
what I mean? And all the guys in the band, they would look down and they would just literally, they were like, they took the part and they just kind of handed it down to me. And uh, so that's the thing. It's like, and then you have to try to find delight in the different styles. Like I actually really like um, that clarinet style. I like fitting into a style. Like I really enjoy that, even though, certain pieces are not from my generation. But the more that you can actually enjoy fitting in, then you make the rest of the band sound better. So that's how I would answer that question. Thank you for that. For
That's
that.
really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great question, Anna. Todd, we have one more student question, and then we have several questions in the Q&A feature, but we only have about 10 minutes left. So let's see if we
Okay.
can get through these, but we want to make sure Vincent comes on and asks our question. Vincent is another one of those great jazz students from Noblesville High School. Hi, Vincent. What's your question?
Hello.
Hey,
So
Vincent.
I was wondering, Mr. Williams, what your advice would be for someone who has really high aspirations and wants to do something that's going to require a lot of work in order to avoid, getting burned out or kind of struggling to reach those goals.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your question. For all of these questions, I kind of thought ahead of time. And for this question, I was thinking the simplest thing that you can do as a musician um, is to be really open and to be very slow to be offended and to be a likable person yourself. And you might say, well, that's personal. That's not music. So the reason I say that, and you seem like you're very likable. I like you. But what I'm saying is, so like when you meet people for the first time, you know, it's like with anything else, you have an entire history that they don't know about and vice versa. And so you're trying to make the two worlds collide. And I have found that if you cannot be offended upon first meeting somebody, you can become a really good friend, and that person can be an ally for you. In fact, one of the very first times that I met, in fact, it was the very first time that I met Winton. he was making jokes about my sweater. I'm wearing a sweater right now. He told me that I look like Lionel Richie. Now, I could have been offended. I could have been offended to, oh man, I'm getting out of here, man. But, I just took it in strides. Oh, he's just joking. You know what I mean? And so what you want to be is very easily very approachable. That's your very first open door for a gig, believe it or not, even though that seems like it has nothing to do with playing a gig, but people hire their friends. As funny as that sounds, they hire their friends over who is the best musician. And that is kind of a surprise. And then the other thing, to answer your question, is to make sure you show up on time. People love others who show up on time. If you show up on time, you get the gig over the person who actually might be a stronger musician than you. That's kind of a funny thing, right? So,
But I mean, you hear the drummer jokes for a reason. I try to
Yeah,
avoid
yeah.
being that drummer.
Yeah, well, it really is true. The things that make, when you meet somebody who's a band leader and they say, oh, I just love having so-and-so and so-and-so, it's because they can depend on that person. They're reliable. And so it seems like a very easy thing to do, but it's actually not. It's more challenging than one would think. And to just be a friend to somebody, be available and be willing to not be offended, because what they may be sharing with you might be the key to you discovering your gift. So yeah. Well, I think we have to rush off to the next question because we're
Thank
running
you.
out of time. But thanks, Vincent. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and that's a great question. We've done quite a few of these car front seat sessions, and I will say that is a theme that we hear through all of them is just, to be successful, start out by being collaborative and being a nice person, no drama, no diva, and then you will be hired because people will remember you for that and want
That's
you
right.
for the next gig and the next gig. So
That's right. That's
yeah.
right.
All right, we've got 3 questions. Let's see if we can get to them. And then if anybody on Facebook wants to pop a question in the chat, we can get to that too. But,
Sure.
this is a good segue into what you were just talking about with Vincent. But Jacob asks, what do you recommend to a young musician who has just moved to a new state and would like to make friends with people who also like jazz?
Yeah. Okay. So I would recommend um, maybe go online, find out where your favorite artists are performing, and whoever's performing locally, because there's always somebody in your local city who's performing. Um, Go see them, take your instrument with you, and if it's somebody that you really like, prepare one of their pieces that you like on your instrument. So, you know, before someone said, "Oh yeah, I like Robert Glasper." Well, if you really like Robert Glasper, learn a bunch of his tunes, as many as you can, and show up at the stage door during their sound check, and just stand there. Just stand there at the stage door. And when they show up for sound checks are usually between 4:30 and 6:30. So you stand by the stage door. If somebody says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I'm hoping I can meet Robert Glasper." And if they tell you to leave, then politely leave, but then show up somewhere else, but just stand by that stage door. And eventually they're going to walk through that door. You're going to meet them and say, "Hi, my name is so-and-so. I really love your stuff. In fact, I learned all of," and then name an entire album of tunes that you learned by that artist. And then they're going to say, "Really? Wow." And then they're going to say, "Come on into the sound check." And that's how you meet people. I've seen it again and again and again.
Yeah, and Jacob, you might type in the Q&A part, what what city you have moved to. You know, I know like in Indy, there's several jazz clubs, you know, that you could go to and just kind of hang out. I know lots of folks who like jazz will go to those clubs and just night after night. And so you get to kind of meet that community of
Right.
jazz musicians in that area. We got more questions coming in, Todd. So
Oh,
let's see if we
wonderful.
can get to these. The next one is actually from a student that was going to join us in the chat today, but the Zoom link wasn't working. So
Okay.
but his name's John, and he's another Jacobs School of Music at IU, a student. He says, what do you look for in a drummer, and who have been some of the best drummers you have worked with? And
Oh,
what
that's
makes them
great.
good?
Yeah. Um, Obviously, I think one of the best drummers I ever played with was Elvin Jones, and drummer with John Coltrane. Um, and although I didn't play with him, I did have a chance to hang out and chat with Max Roach. Obviously, those are two of the superstars of jazz. Uh, but Jonathan Reilly, New York jazz drummer, I always thought he was like one of the most swinging drummers. Um, Used to play with the Vanguard Orchestra. I don't know what he's doing these days, but he's a fantastic drummer. And what I listen for in a drummer is whether or not they can play with taste, intensity while playing soft. And then when it's time to really give loud intensity, that they really give it when it's time, you know. And let me throw this out there. The hardest rhythm, and this is for any musician, the hardest rhythm for any musician is to play 4 quarter notes consecutively. That, just keeping a steady beat, you would be shocked how many people cannot do that. Okay, so I always tell my students when I work with them, you need to get with the metronome, 4 quarter notes in a row. You need to practice that, you know, and it sounds like kind of earth shattering to everybody's ego, but that is the hardest rhythm in music, counting 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Great. Well, let me see. We've got, oh, John's typed in another question, but let's get to Peg. And she just asks briefly, what's life like on the road for a musician?
Okay, so life on the road, I think most people may not enjoy life on the road. You wake up, bags out by 7, down to the lobby by 9, and you head off to the next city. One of the things that I experienced, I met a lot of musicians who were into reading great books and, you know, philosophy and theories and all kinds of stuff. And so people get into really great conversations on the road. It can be often boring. It can be very monotonous with airline travel because of all of the regulations and things like that. Um, but meeting people, that's what happens during the concert and after the concert. That's always the most meaningful part, I think, you know. And of course, you experience magic on the stage. You know, you get to experience the fun part on the stage, you know. Being able to go for something and really accomplishing something special spontaneously, that's the excitement of the road life.
Yeah. I bet you get tired of the food though on the road,
Yes, this is true.
except at the center. I have heard that we have really good food at the center that we've.
Yeah, the Palladium, they have excellent, like I said, the Palladium is excellent in terms of professionalism. You guys are a step above the rest. I have to say that. And it's not because of this show, but because it really is true.
Well, it's important to us to make everyone happy and comfortable. And if the musicians are happy and comfortable, the audience will be.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we can get to these next 2 questions. And you think we can do it in 5 minutes?
I think we can.
All right, here we go. Doug asks, what advice can you give to an aspiring jazz musician regarding finding a balance between time spent in the practice room versus the value of gaining experience with other musicians on the bandstand?
Okay. All
So
right.
it's a
So
balance between being in the practice room and working with other musicians, it sounds like.
yeah, well, what you work on in the practice room, that consists of the fundamentals. So scales, arpeggios, understanding forms. You practice all the different forms of the tunes that you're going to play, making sure that you know all the fundamentals. And then when you're on the stage, risk failure on the stage. That is where you do that. And a lot of people don't understand that about jazz, but if you never risk anything on stage, you will never grow. So that's my advice. Risk it all on the stage.
But isn't it also, you're talking about being a good person and liking the other musicians. Isn't there a level of trust? Because I know in jazz, so much of it is improvisation. You really got to trust the other musicians if you're going to take that risk.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And in most cases, you kind of know, as if you're playing jazz, you realize, or you should realize, that everybody in the band is responsible for the form. Everybody's responsible for the intensity. So if the rest of the band drops out and it's just you playing and you're a horn player, hey, that's fair game.
Yeah.
We do it to the bass players all the time, But most horn players don't experience that. They always have a drummer and a bass player playing with them. But it really should be the case. The ideal is for everybody to be as independent enough to just play on their own, or have someone join them, or to play duos or trios, or however the group spontaneously moves.
Yeah.
Should
Kind of
be.
go with it. Yeah.
That's
That's
it.
what it's all about. Okay. Our last question before we wrap up is again from John, the IU student. How would you go about playing with your idols? One of his idols that he would love to play with is Michael Camillo. He
Yeah,
says
Michelle
he's
Camilo.
preparing to make connections. Did I pronounce that incorrectly?
Michelle Camilo, yes.
Oh, I should have my glasses on. Michelle Camilo. He is preparing to make connections with people he works with and learn his rep. Any other suggestions?
Yes. Well, I don't know what instrument you play, John, but yeah, like I said, continue to learn that rep. And then I've never met Michelle in person, but I'm sure he would be open to, hanging out with you. This is what you do. If you do have that moment backstage where, you go to sound check or whatever, and you get to meet the guys in the band, hey, I'll take you out to dinner. Offer free food. Whatever you got to do to make a hang happen, or even after the gig. A lot of times musicians, they can't unwind. Like when they finish a performance, they're like on cloud nine. They can't unwind, and just go to sleep right away. So say, hey man, let's do a hang. Let's go. I got a place I want to take you guys. I'll make sure you get back to your hotel room, on time, whatever, da 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 da. As long as you're ensure that everybody can get where they need to be at the right time, they'll hang out with you and have a great time. So I would suggest that social edge to kind of enter the relationship in that way. And I think you will gain friends very quickly in that regard, and you will have an opportunity at some point to play with these musicians that you want to play with.
Great. Well, I think that's all our questions. I want to bring all the students back on if they could turn on their cameras. There they come. What a good looking group. Great jazz. We got a whole jazz. So let's see. We got what, a septet here? So we should have had y'all bring your instruments and play something for us. So I want to give the students a round of applause, and I want to give Mr. Williams, Todd, a round of applause. And check out, there's so many videos of Todd on YouTube performing, and then you've got your new CD that's out, that's available, I know, on Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. But I did want to say to the students and everybody else who's watching us, if you like jazz, we got some more stuff coming up for you. We've got that new series that I mentioned called Jazz Talk. Again, it's through Zoom, and it's also streamed to Facebook Live, and it's free to join us on that. Todd is one of our co-hosts, along with Doug Tatum, who is the center's vice president of programming, who's much of a jazz guru himself. So December 8th, they'll be doing one at 7 p.m., and it's called Trailblazers. In every genre of music, there are those who redefine the genre and even go beyond to influence others outside that discipline. We refer to these individuals as Trailblazers. So that's the December one. And then, so we're skipping every other month. Then February 9th, their next session that they're going to talk about is the standards of jazz. They'll discuss the tunes that have become jazz standards, the popular songs, show tunes, and other compositions that have appeared and reappeared throughout the history of jazz. I also want to mention our new series called Live at the Center, and we are bringing in local and regional bands to help support them during COVID. All of those programs are streamed through Facebook, our website, YouTube, and Vimeo, all at the same time. So you can't miss it. And we've just started that. We've had 2 sessions already. Charlie Ballantyne kicked it off. We've got several jazz artists coming up, and that'll run through April. So check out our website. And then lastly, I just want to mention that this Car Front Seat series, we're doing 1 a month. And next month in December, we've got David Loeber coming up. David he's just an amazing person. I was able to meet him a few years ago in New York. He's a professional stage manager. He has done, you name a Broadway show, he has stage managed it. And he's done national tours. He's worked with Tom Hanks and, all the great actors. And he's got some stories to tell. So if you're interested at all in the behind the scenes or even on stage of the theater, sign up for that. We're already looking for students for that. But you can also just, be in the background and type in your questions. And then in January, we have Jane Fitch, who is a Broadway actor, singer, musician, and narrator. And she was in the Broadway cast of Dear Evan Hansen, beautiful musical, when COVID hit. But her resume goes on and on and on. So we're also looking for students to sign up to do that. Again, I want to thank all of you who joined us today, all the students. Another round of applause for you guys. Yay! And I want to thank all of you who joined us, and especially thank you to Car Global for sponsoring this program. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Julia.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.